A powerful mafia boss, known for his cold heart and iron control, crosses paths with an ordinary young woman on a suffocating summer night. What begins as a simple misunderstanding slowly turns into a moment that neither of them will ever forget. The night was unusually hot, the kind of heat that clung to the skin and made even breathing feel heavy. The city below buzzed with life, neon lights glowing like restless stars. High above it all, in a luxury penthouse overlooking the skyline, Adrian Russo stood alone. Adrian Russo was not a man who believed in coincidence. He ruled the city's underworld with discipline and fear, his name whispered more often than spoken aloud. Tonight, however, the silence inside his penthouse felt louder than gunshots. He loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and stared out at the city that belonged to him, but never truly satisfied him. He had sent everyone away. No guards, no staff. He wanted isolation, control. Meanwhile, several floors below, Leah Carter wiped sweat from her forehead and sighed in frustration. She was part of an event management crew hired for a private corporate function earlier that evening. The job was supposed to be simple: organize, clean up, and leave. But the air conditioning on her floor had failed, turning the hallway into an oven. "I just need some air," she muttered to herself. Leah followed a stairwell she believed led to a service balcony. She had been told that the upper floors were empty. No one warned her about him. The door opened quietly. She stepped into a massive, dimly lit space, cool marble under her feet, tall glass walls stretching from floor to ceiling. The view stole her breath for a second. The city looked unreal from up here. "Wow," she whispered. Certain she was alone, Leah walked further inside, unaware of the presence watching from the shadows. Adrian heard the door. His instincts kicked in instantly. Every muscle in his body tensed as he turned slowly, eyes narrowing. No one entered his space without permission. His hand instinctively moved toward the table where a weapon usually rested, except tonight, it wasn't there. He stepped forward silently. That was when he saw her. Leah stood near the window, fanning herself with her hand, her face flushed from the heat. She looked exhausted, vulnerable, completely out of place in his world. This wasn't an assassin. This wasn't a threat. And that confusion caught him off guard. For the first time in years, Adrian Russo froze. Leah suddenly sensed something behind her. A presence. She turned. Their eyes met. Her breath caught in her throat. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black, his expression unreadable. There was an intensity in his stare that made her heart pound. She didn't need an introduction. She knew who he was. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said quickly, panic creeping into her voice. "I thought this place was empty. I didn't mean to. This floor is restricted," Adrian said calmly, though his voice carried authority that filled the room. "You shouldn't be here." I know, she replied, swallowing hard. "I'll leave. The heat, I got lost." She took a step back, embarrassed and shaken. Adrian studied her carefully. Fear was there, yes, but not deception. She wasn't acting. That made the situation more unsettling than any lie could have. "Who are you?" he asked. Leah Carter. I work for the event team downstairs." Silence stretched between them. The city hummed outside, unaware of the strange tension suspended in that room. Adrian finally turned away, walking toward the bar. "You picked the wrong night to get lost." Leah nodded. "I realize that." He poured himself water this time, the ice clinking loudly in the quiet. When he turned back, he noticed how pale she looked now, the heat clearly affecting her. "Sit," he said abruptly. "What?" she asked. "Before you pass out," he added. She hesitated, then slowly sat on the edge of a chair, unsure if she should be grateful or terrified. Adrian pressed a button on the wall, activating a backup cooling system. Cold air began to flow gently. "You'll leave once you're steady," he said. "No one will bother you." Leah looked up at him, surprised. "Thank you." Their eyes met again, this time softer, more curious. Neither of them understood it yet, but something had shifted. This wasn't just an accident. It was the beginning of a story neither of them could escape. Adrian stood near the bar longer than necessary, pretending to focus on the glass in his hand while his attention stayed fixed on Leah sitting across the room. The cool air slowly settled in, but the tension didn't fade, it thickened, wrapping around them like the lingering heat of the night. Leah shifted slightly in the chair, suddenly aware of how quiet the penthouse had become, every small movement echoing too loudly. She glanced toward the door, calculating how fast she could leave without offending the most dangerous man in the city. Adrian noticed. He always noticed. You're free to go, he said at last, his voice even, controlled. The elevator is down the hall. Leah stood quickly, relief washing over her face. Thank you. I really didn't mean to cause trouble. She took 2 steps toward the exit before stopping. Something about walking away felt unfinished, like leaving a sentence half spoken. Your air system saved me, she added softly. I won't forget that. Adrian raised an eyebrow, faintly amused despite himself. People don't usually remember kindness from me. She met his eyes again, surprising him with a small, honest smile. Maybe they should. The words lingered after she turned and walked out. Adrian remained where he was, listening to the soft click of the door closing behind her. He told himself it meant nothing, just a stranger, a moment, an inconvenience. Yet long after she was gone, the penthouse felt emptier than before. Down the hall, Leah leaned against the wall, her heart racing. She hadn't realized how tense she'd been until now. Being that close to Adrian Russo felt like standing next to a storm, dangerous, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. She took a deep breath and headed for the elevator, unaware that security cameras had followed her every step. The next morning, the city woke as it always did, unaware of the quiet shift that had occurred the night before. Adrian sat at the long conference table in one of his private offices, listening as his men reported numbers, shipments, and territory updates. He responded automatically, his mind elsewhere. Boss, Marco said carefully, noticing his distraction, everything okay? Adrian's gaze sharpened. Perfect. But later, alone, he replayed the scene in his mind, the way Leah's voice had trembled at first, then steadied, the way she hadn't begged or panicked. Curiosity, a weakness he despised, took hold. By noon, he had her file. Leah Carter, 26. No criminal record. Working freelance event jobs to pay off student loans. Ordinary. Safe. The kind of person his world usually crushed without noticing. He should have closed the file. Instead, he memorized it. That same afternoon, Leah arrived at another venue across town, still shaken from the previous night. She told herself to forget it. People like Adrian Russo didn't cross paths with people like her twice. As she organized table settings and checked lighting, a sleek black car pulled up outside. She didn't notice at first, until the room subtly changed. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. Leah looked up, her stomach dropping. Adrian walked in, dressed in a tailored suit, his presence commanding instant attention. He hadn't planned on seeing her again so soon, but an impulse had brought him here under the excuse of checking a business partner's event. His eyes found hers immediately. Leah froze, her hands gripping the clipboard. He crossed the room slowly, ignoring everyone else. Miss Carter, he said calmly. Her coworkers stared, confused. Mr. Russo, she replied, managing professionalism despite her nerves. Did you need something? Just making sure you didn't get lost again, he said, his tone unreadable. A few people laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke. Leah felt heat rise to her face. I've learned my lesson. He nodded once. Good. He turned to leave, then paused. You're working late tonight. The question caught her off guard. Yes, she answered honestly. There's a teardown after the event. Adrian considered this, then spoke quietly. Have someone walk you to your car. It sounded like an order, not advice. Before she could respond, he was gone. Leah stood there, heart pounding, aware that nothing about this was normal anymore. As the evening wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not in a threatening way, but protective. Outside, across the street, a car idled longer than necessary. Adrian told himself it was precaution. The city was dangerous at night. Still, when Leah finally exited the building, tired and relieved, she found a driver waiting. Mr. Russo asked me to make sure you got home safely, the man said politely. Leah hesitated, then nodded. The ride was silent, but her thoughts were loud. By the time she reached her apartment, she understood something unsettling and undeniable. The accidental moment in the heat of that night had connected her to a man who didn't let go easily. And somewhere across the city, Adrian stood by a window once more, watching the lights below, fully aware that for the first time in years, control was slipping, not because of enemies or power struggles, but because of one woman who had walked into his world by mistake. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm neither of them had expected. Leah tried to return to her normal life, early mornings, late nights, juggling calls and schedules, but Adrian Russo's presence lingered like a shadow she couldn't quite step out of. She noticed it in small things, a black car parked across the street when she left work late, a sense of safety that didn't belong in her neighborhood, an unfamiliar calm that came from knowing someone powerful was watching from a distance. She told herself it was coincidence, yet deep down she knew better. Adrian, meanwhile, fought a quieter battle. He had built his empire by eliminating distractions, by cutting emotional ties before they could weaken him, and yet Leah Carter had slipped past every defense without effort. He didn't call her, didn't send messages, didn't force his way into her life. Instead, he observed, something he had always done best. He learned her routine, the cafe she stopped at every morning, the way she smiled politely at strangers but laughed freely with people she trusted. What unsettled him most was how ordinary her life was, how untouched by violence and fear it remained. One evening, as Leah sat alone at the cafe after a long shift, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Miss Carter," Adrian's voice came through, low and steady. Her heart skipped. "Mr. Russo, I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "You're not," she replied, surprised by how calm she sounded. "I wanted to thank you," he continued, "for not talking about that night." Leah frowned slightly. There was nothing to talk about. A pause followed, then a quiet exhale. "Still, I appreciate discretion." She glanced around the cafe, suddenly aware of the distance between their worlds shrinking through a simple phone call. "Why are you calling me?" she asked gently. Adrian didn't answer right away. He wasn't used to explaining himself. "Because I owe you dinner," he finally said. Leah nearly laughed. "I don't think people like you owe people like me anything." "I disagree," he replied. "And I don't like unfinished business." She considered refusing. That would have been the smart choice. But curiosity, dangerous, irresistible, won. "One dinner," she said. "In a public place." Adrian's tone held a hint of approval. "Of course." They met 2 nights later at a quiet restaurant overlooking the river, chosen carefully for its privacy and security. Leah arrived first, nerves buzzing beneath her composed exterior. When Adrian walked in, the room seemed to shift around him, conversations lowering instinctively. He took the seat across from her, setting his phone face down. "You look different," he said. "So do you," she replied. Without the shadows and tension of the penthouse, he looked less like a myth and more like a man, still dangerous, but human. Conversation came slowly at first, then easier. He asked about her work, her goals. She asked nothing about his business, sensing boundaries better left untouched. The wine loosened something between them, and laughter, unexpected, real, slipped into the space. For a moment, the world felt normal. That illusion shattered when Adrian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it once, his expression hardening instantly. "I have to go," he said, standing. "Is everything okay?" Leah asked. "It will be," he answered, though the tension in his jaw said otherwise. Outside, the night air was cool, the river reflecting city lights. "I'm glad we did this," Leah said. Adrian met her gaze, something conflicted flickering in his eyes. "So am I." Then, without warning, chaos erupted. A car screeched to a halt nearby. Shouts followed. Adrian moved instantly, stepping in front of Leah as gunshots cracked through the air. He pushed her behind a concrete barrier, his body shielding hers completely. "Stay down," he ordered. Her heart thundered as she clutched his jacket, fear unlike anything she'd known surging through her. His men arrived within seconds, returning fire, dragging the attackers away. When silence finally fell, Adrian turned to Leah, scanning her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No," she whispered, shaking. "But you," he was unscathed. He always was. Still, the look on his face wasn't victory, it was anger, sharp and burning. "This is why I stay alone," he said quietly. "Anyone near me becomes a target." Leah looked up at him, realization sinking in. This wasn't excitement or mystery. This was danger, real, lethal danger. "Then maybe this was a mistake," she said softly. Adrian's jaw tightened. Maybe. He saw fear in her eyes now, mixed with something else, sadness. That hurt more than bullets ever could. He escorted her home himself, the drive silent. When they reached her building, she turned to him. "Thank you, for protecting me." Adrian nodded once. "From now on, you won't see me again," he said firmly. "It's safer that way." Leah wanted to argue, to ask why that idea felt so wrong, but she knew he meant it. She stepped out of the car, watching it disappear into the night. Upstairs, she leaned against her door, tears blurring her vision. Across the city, Adrian stood in his office, fists clenched, knowing he had just made the hardest decision of his life, walking away from the one person who made him feel human, because loving her might get her killed. Yet even as he told himself it was over, he knew the truth. Some connections, once forged in the heat of the night, refused to be broken. Weeks passed, but the distance Adrian had forced between them did not bring the peace he expected. Leah tried to move forward, telling herself that what happened was a sharp lesson in reality. Some worlds were never meant to touch. She threw herself into work, accepting extra shifts, filling every empty hour so she wouldn't think about the way Adrian had stepped in front of her without hesitation, or the look in his eyes when he told her goodbye. Yet memories clung stubbornly. Every siren made her tense. Every black car made her heart jump. Adrian, on the other hand, discovered that separation did not equal control. His nights grew restless, his patience thin. His men noticed it in the way he snapped during meetings, in the way his gaze lingered too long on nothing. Enemies sensed weakness, and whispers began to spread that Russo was distracted. One night, Marco brought troubling news. An emerging rival group was probing Adrian's territory, looking for leverage. "They're asking questions about a woman," Marco said carefully. Adrian's blood went cold. "What woman?" "Leah Carter." Rage flared instantly. He slammed his hand on the desk. "I told you to keep her invisible." "We did," Marco replied. "But someone followed you after the restaurant incident." They connected the dots. Adrian stood abruptly. Every decision he'd made to protect her now felt fragile, insufficient. That same evening, Leah returned home to find her apartment door slightly ajar. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside, every sense on high alert. Nothing was missing. Nothing appeared broken. Yet the air felt wrong, like a warning. Her phone rang. "Adrian." She answered before thinking. "Don't say anything," he said sharply. "Are you alone?" "Yes," she whispered. "Someone's been here." "Leave now," he ordered. "Go to the corner cafe and wait." "I'm coming." Fear warred with relief. She grabbed her coat and left, glancing over her shoulder the entire way. Adrian arrived minutes later, fury barely contained. He checked the area himself, posting men discreetly around the block. When he finally sat across from her, his expression softened with guilt. "I failed you," he said. "You told me to stay away," Leah replied, her voice trembling. "I tried. This isn't your fault," he said firmly. "It's mine." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truth. "What happens now?" she asked. Adrian looked away. "You disappear for a while. Somewhere safe." "I can't just vanish," she said. "This is my life." He met her gaze, intensity raw. "And it's in danger because of me." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't get to decide everything for me." The words struck him harder than any threat. He exhaled slowly. "You're right." That night, Leah moved into a secure residence under a false name, a temporary solution she hated but accepted. Adrian visited rarely, always cautious, always guarded. Yet every meeting chipped away at the walls he'd built. They talked, really talked, about fear, about choice, about the cost of power. Leah saw the man beneath the legend, scarred not just by violence but by loneliness. Adrian saw strength in her that had nothing to do with weapons or influence. The city, however, did not wait. The rival group made their move, attacking one of Adrian's warehouses. The message was clear: they knew where to strike to hurt him. Adrian retaliated swiftly, but escalation was inevitable. One evening, as rain poured over the city, Leah watched the news in the safe house, her chest tight with worry. When her phone rang, she knew before answering. "I need to see you," Adrian said. Now. They met on the penthouse balcony where it had all begun. The air was cool this time, the city shimmering below. "This ends tonight," Adrian said. "I'm taking care of them." Leah stepped closer. "And after?" He hesitated. "After, I leave this life." The words stunned her. "You can do that. I have enough," he said quietly. "Enough power. Enough money. Enough blood." He turned to her. "But I won't have you unless I change." Her heart raced. "And if you don't make it, then you forget me," he said simply. "Live free." She shook her head, tears falling. "Don't say that." He cupped her face gently, a rare, vulnerable gesture. "You changed me, Leah. Whatever happens tonight, that's real." Sirens echoed in the distance. Time was slipping away. "Come back," she whispered. Adrian pressed his forehead to hers. "I will." Hours later, dawn broke with heavy news. The rival leader had been arrested. Adrian Russo had vanished. Days turned into weeks. Leah waited, clinging to hope while building a new routine. Then one morning, as sunlight filled her apartment, a knock came at the door. She opened it to find Adrian standing there, not in a suit, not guarded, just a man with tired eyes and a small, genuine smile. "I'm done," he said softly. Her breath caught as relief flooded her. "You're really here?" He nodded. "And this time, I'm staying." The weeks after Adrian's return unfolded slowly, cautiously, as if both of them were afraid that moving too fast might shatter what they had fought so hard to protect. Adrian kept his promise. He stepped away from the life that had once defined him, selling interests, handing control to people he trusted, cutting ties that had been written in blood. It wasn't clean or easy, and some nights he came home silent and distant, carrying the weight of choices he could never fully erase. Leah learned to read those moments, to give him space without pulling away, to remind him that the future didn't have to be a punishment for the past. They moved into a modest apartment far from the skyline that once symbolized his power, choosing anonymity over luxury. For Leah, the change felt grounding. For Adrian, it felt terrifying and freeing all at once. He discovered the strangeness of ordinary routines, buying groceries, fixing a broken sink, waiting in line like everyone else. There were days when the simplicity unsettled him more than violence ever had, when the lack of control left him restless. Leah became his anchor, not by fixing him, but by refusing to be afraid of who he was becoming. Still, danger had a way of echoing long after it seemed gone. Whispers from his old world reached him through channels he tried to ignore, rumors of unfinished business, of men who didn't believe he was truly out. He told Leah nothing, not wanting to pull her back into fear, but she sensed the tension returning, the way his shoulders tightened when unknown numbers flashed on his phone. One evening, as they sat on the fire escape watching the city lights flicker on, she finally spoke. "You're not sleeping," she said gently. Adrian didn't deny it. "Some doors don't close quietly," he replied. "They never do," she said. "But hiding from them won't make them disappear." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and understood that she wasn't asking him to be fearless, she was asking him to be honest. The next day, Adrian received a message he had been expecting and dreading, a meeting request from a former ally who claimed to want peace. Adrian knew better, but avoiding it could invite worse consequences. He told Leah everything that night, laying out the risks, the possibilities, the truth he had once kept locked away. "You don't have to stay," he said quietly. "Not for this." Leah reached for his hand. "I choose to," she said. "Just like you chose to come back." The meeting took place in a neutral location, tense but controlled. Adrian walked in without guards, signaling that he was serious about leaving the past behind. Words were exchanged, veiled threats wrapped in polite language, until finally the truth surfaced. The old world wanted reassurance that Adrian Russo would never reclaim his throne. Adrian gave it, publicly and irrevocably, surrendering what remained of his influence. It cost him pride, security, and the last illusion of power, but it bought something far greater. When he returned home that night, drained but unbroken, Leah was waiting. She didn't ask questions. She simply held him as the weight of a lifetime slowly loosened its grip. Months passed. The city forgot his name, replacing fear with new legends. Adrian began working quietly, investing in legitimate ventures, helping dismantle pieces of the very systems he once ruled. Redemption wasn't dramatic, it was slow, uncomfortable, and filled with doubt, but it was real. Leah thrived too, her career growing, her confidence deepening. Together, they learned that love wasn't about rescue or sacrifice alone, but about standing side by side when the noise faded. One night, nearly a year after the heat-filled encounter that started it all, they returned to the riverfront restaurant where danger had first revealed the truth between them. The city looked the same, but they were not. Adrian watched Leah laugh at something trivial, her ease a quiet miracle, and felt something settle inside him at last. "I used to think control was everything," he said softly. "Now," she smiled at him. "Now you know better." He took her hand, the future no longer a battlefield but an open road. Whatever scars remained, they carried them together, not as reminders of fear, but as proof that even in the heat of the darkest nights, something lasting and human could still be born. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting soft lines across the apartment where Adrian and Leah had begun to build a life together. For the first time in years, Adrian moved through the space without tension, without scanning every shadow, without expecting betrayal. He brewed coffee quietly while Leah flipped through her planner, making notes for upcoming events, her presence a calm rhythm that reminded him there were things in life worth protecting that had nothing to do with power or fear. The peace, however, was fragile, a delicate thing that required attention. Even as Adrian tried to distance himself from his past, remnants of it clung stubbornly. Rumors still circulated in the underworld, whispers of his disappearance had grown into questions that only someone like him could answer. He chose to ignore them. There was Leah, and there was the present, and for now, that was enough. The city continued its chaotic hum beyond their walls, oblivious to the quiet transformation of one of its most notorious figures. Days turned into weeks, and Adrian found a surprising comfort in the routines of ordinary life, walking through the crowded streets without being feared, seeing Leah smile at strangers without concern, cooking dinner together without interruption. Yet even in this calm, he noticed her occasionally glance toward the window, a fleeting shadow of worry in her eyes. One evening, after an event she had organized, Leah returned home later than usual. Adrian noticed immediately, his instincts flaring, though he tried to mask the sudden tension. "You're late," he said lightly, though his voice carried an edge that made her freeze for a second. "The event ran over," she explained, brushing off her coat and attempting casualness. Everything went smoothly. He didn't speak for a moment, studying her expression, noting the faint exhaustion beneath her confident demeanor. "You're taking on too much," he finally said, his tone low, almost a warning. "I can handle it," she replied, though the subtle tremor in her hands betrayed her fatigue. Adrian stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "I just want you safe," he murmured, and in that simple declaration, Leah felt the weight of his past and the tenderness he now reserved solely for her. They sat together that night, discussing plans for her career, their future, and the tentative dreams they allowed themselves to entertain. The world outside remained dangerous, but inside the apartment, it was quiet. Adrian's phone buzzed sporadically, news alerts, work from his former contacts, but he ignored each message deliberately, choosing this moment, this sanctuary, over the noise of his past. Leah leaned her head on his shoulder as he read quietly, the bond between them strengthened by shared silence rather than grand gestures. Weeks later, Adrian received a subtle warning: someone from his past had been spotted near Leah's workplace. He didn't panic, but his protective instincts flared. Without alarming her, he discreetly reinforced security around her routines, ensuring she remained unaware of any lingering danger. He watched her from a distance, checking in without intrusion, his presence invisible but constant. Leah, meanwhile, sensed a subtle shift but didn't know the cause. She noticed small gestures, the way the locks seemed more secure, the occasional black car parked nearby, but assumed it was coincidence or a habit he had retained. One rainy afternoon, as she prepared for an important client meeting, Adrian appeared unexpectedly. She startled at first, but he held up his hands, a small smile on his face. "I couldn't let you leave without making sure the streets were clear," he said lightly. She wanted to protest, but the relief washing over her silenced her words. That evening, they shared a rare moment of openness. Sitting across from each other at the small kitchen table, the rain tapping gently against the windows, they talked about fears they had never voiced: his fear of losing control, her fear of bringing danger into his life. Adrian admitted that he often worried that his past would catch up with them both, that even leaving the empire behind didn't erase his reputation or the enemies who still remembered. Leah listened carefully, holding his hand, grounding him in the present. "We can't control everything," she said softly. "All we can do is choose each other." Her words resonated deeper than anything he had heard in years. It was not a surrender, nor a naive hope, it was a conscious decision, a declaration that even amidst shadows of danger, they would face life together. As months went on, the balance between caution and normalcy became routine. Adrian learned to let go, bit by bit, trusting Leah with the parts of himself he had long kept locked away. She, in turn, learned to navigate the fragility of his past while embracing the warmth of the life they built. One evening, while walking along the riverfront where they had first spoken freely after the chaos, Adrian stopped, pulling her close. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked quietly. Leah nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Every so often," she admitted. "I was terrified, but I also knew, somehow, you would protect me." He chuckled softly, the sound rough but sincere. You made me more human than I've been in years, he said. And now, I have no excuse to hide. They paused, the city lights reflecting in the water, a serene reminder that even in a world that demanded fear and obedience, moments of quiet courage could create safety, love, and trust. That night, they returned to their apartment hand in hand, the rain having washed the streets clean, leaving the world feeling renewed. Adrian poured them both tea, and they sat by the window, watching the city glow in the soft light. For the first time, there was no urgency, no threat, only the two of them in a fragile, hard-won peace. And though the shadows of the past still lingered beyond the walls, neither of them doubted their choice, to face whatever came together, to protect one another, and to let the warmth they had discovered in each other guide them through every night, no matter how dark or dangerous it might become. The months that followed settled into a rhythm that neither Leah nor Adrian could have imagined months ago. Life had grown quieter, simpler, yet no less intense, because the intensity now came from connection rather than danger. Mornings began with the soft hum of the city outside their apartment windows, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with Leah's laughter as she recounted small victories at work. Adrian listened more than he spoke, learning to appreciate the subtle victories of ordinary life, the way Leah's eyes lit up when a plan came together, the way she paused to watch a bird alight on the railing outside their window. He still kept an eye on his former empire from a distance, monitoring whispers and rumors, but it no longer dictated his every thought. The danger that had once defined him was present only in memory, and even then, it served as a cautionary reminder rather than a constant threat. One Saturday afternoon, Leah suggested they explore a neighborhood festival she had read about. Adrian hesitated initially, wary of crowds and attention, but her enthusiasm was impossible to resist. They strolled together through streets lined with food stalls and handmade crafts, Leah laughing freely at the oddities she found, Adrian smiling quietly at the world she had brought him into. It was a freedom he had never allowed himself before, a rare space where he could simply exist without expectation, threat, or strategy. Yet even amidst the festival's noise and color, he noticed subtle looks from strangers, men and women who seemed to recognize him, or perhaps just sensed the aura that had followed him his entire life. He tensed instinctively, but Leah's hand in his reminded him that he no longer needed to face the world alone. That evening, as they returned home, Adrian received a call that made his stomach tighten despite the calm he had cultivated. One of his former associates, someone he had trusted and left in charge of a minor operation, reported a problem. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to stir the echoes of his past, the kind of minor ripple that could escalate if ignored. He hung up, a hard edge returning to his expression. Leah noticed immediately. Something wrong? She asked. He shook his head, forcing a small smile. Just old business catching up. She studied him carefully. You don't have to handle it alone anymore. He considered this, the temptation to shield her from the realities of his life warring with the truth. She had already changed him, made him believe he could survive without fear, without solitude. I know, he said quietly. But some things, I have to see through myself. She didn't argue. Instead, she rested her head against his shoulder, silently offering support. The following week brought the first true test of their fragile normalcy. A rival group, remnants from Adrian's former empire, attempted to leverage his name to reclaim lost territory. Threats were made, not public but insidious, aimed at drawing Adrian back into the life he had promised to leave behind. He acted quickly, decisively, but carefully, ensuring that Leah remained completely uninvolved. Still, the fear that someone could harm her because of him gnawed at him. One night, after the immediate danger had passed, Leah confronted him. Do you think it's ever really over? She asked softly, her hands gripping his. Maybe not, he admitted. But it doesn't control us anymore. That's the part that matters. She nodded, feeling the weight of his words. They stood together in the living room, the quiet hum of the city outside their window reflecting a life that had been won through courage, patience, and trust. As the months passed, Adrian found himself opening up in ways he had never dared before. He told her stories of his childhood, the choices that had led him to power, the mistakes that had cost lives and friendships alike. Leah listened without judgment, offering understanding and compassion instead of fear or pity. In turn, she shared her own fears, her ambitions, and the quiet moments that made her happiest. Their intimacy grew not from danger or seduction but from the authenticity of being seen and accepted. Winter arrived, and with it, a sharp contrast to the oppressive heat of the night that had first brought them together. They spent long evenings inside, the city lights reflecting on frost-covered windows, talking about plans that once would have seemed impossible. Adrian suggested a small trip outside the country, a chance to experience life without the lingering shadows of his past. Leah agreed, eager for adventure, but insisted they also take small joys at home, cooking together, reading, walking through parks, laughing at nothing in particular. One evening, as snow began to fall, Adrian found himself on the balcony, watching the flakes drift down like frozen whispers. Leah joined him, wrapping herself in a blanket he draped over her shoulders. "Do you miss it?" she asked quietly, referring to the empire he had left behind. He shook his head. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not enough to risk this." She smiled, understanding. The love they had cultivated, the life they were building, was worth every sacrifice, every moment of fear they had endured. As the snow fell heavier, Adrian held her close, promising silently that he would protect this peace, this life, with everything he had. The city continued its restless hum below, but for the first time in years, Adrian Russo felt a sense of permanence, not from power, not from fear, but from something far more enduring: trust, love, and the shared understanding that they had survived the heat of chaos together. Days turned to weeks, and Adrian and Leah found themselves planning for the future, not the kind dictated by control or necessity, but the kind dictated by choice. They discussed apartments, careers, and even the faint possibility of starting a family. Each conversation carried a weight of hope they hadn't allowed themselves in the past. Every decision reinforced the reality that the life they had fought to preserve was not an illusion, but a promise. One late evening, Adrian received a letter at their apartment. No sender, no mark, just a simple envelope with his initials. He opened it cautiously, half expecting a threat or ultimatum. Instead, it contained a single message, a confirmation that his former adversaries had been neutralized, their plans dismantled without violence or bloodshed. He exhaled, relief mingling with the lingering tension of past years. Leah noticed the subtle shift immediately. "It's over," he said softly, the first genuine smile in months spreading across his face. She stepped closer, embracing him. "It is," she whispered. And in that embrace, they both understood that the heat of that fateful night, the fear, the chaos, and the danger, had led them to this calm, a life they had chosen together, forged through trials and tempered in the fires of survival. For the first time, Adrian Russo allowed himself to believe that love, not fear, would define his future. And Leah, by his side, knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, stronger and more certain than ever before. The winter had finally given way to spring, and with it came a sense of renewal that mirrored the life Adrian and Leah had painstakingly built together. The city's skyline glittered under the afternoon sun, and for the first time in years, Adrian could walk its streets without the familiar tension of danger pressing down on him. He had left the empire behind completely, divested of all interests, and ensured that the remaining pieces of his former life could no longer reach him, or Leah. It was a freedom he had never imagined possible, and yet, despite the calm, he carried a quiet vigilance within him, the instincts of a man who had survived countless threats. Leah noticed the change too, subtle but profound. He laughed more easily, slept more soundly, and allowed himself to be present in ways he never had before. She reveled in it, the ordinary joy of shared breakfasts, spontaneous walks in the park, and evenings spent planning vacations far from the city's relentless hum. It was a life neither of them had dared dream of when they first met, and yet here they were, fragile but unbroken, their connection deepened by the trials they had survived. One evening, as the city's lights began to sparkle against the dusk, Adrian suggested they revisit the riverfront where it had all begun. Leah agreed, her hand slipping into his as they walked. The air was warm, scented with the early bloom of flowers lining the promenade. Adrian stopped at the same spot where months earlier he had admitted the fragility of his control and his fears for her safety. He looked out over the water, the reflection of city lights dancing like liquid stars. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked quietly. Leah smiled, a trace of nervousness in her eyes. "I do," she admitted. "Every so often. I remember being terrified, but also knowing you would protect me, no matter what." Adrian's gaze softened, his hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. You changed everything for me, he said. You made me see that life isn't just about control or power. There's more worth protecting than an empire built on fear. Leah leaned into him, feeling the weight of his words settle into her chest. And I've learned that love isn't about being fearless, she said. It's about being willing to face the fear together. The simplicity of their shared understanding brought a peace that neither had ever known. Yet life, even when carefully constructed, rarely stayed quiet for long. A few weeks later, Adrian received an unexpected visitor at the apartment. It was a former business associate, someone who had once been loyal to the empire but now carried only curiosity and information. The man delivered news that could have been dangerous, but Adrian remained calm, measured. He had learned to anticipate threats without letting them dominate his life. Everything that could touch us has been neutralized, he said firmly. The associate nodded, understanding the weight behind his words, and left without further comment. Adrian returned to Leah, who had been waiting quietly in the living room. See, he said lightly, though his tone carried reassurance. Nothing can touch us now. She smiled, a mixture of relief and admiration. I hope you mean that, she teased gently. I do, he replied, pulling her close. In the weeks that followed, the couple found themselves embracing the ordinary with a fervor neither had known possible. They discovered new hobbies together, from cooking classes to weekend hikes in the nearby hills. Adrian learned to appreciate the patience required for mundane tasks, and Leah found joy in the quiet certainty that came from their shared routines. Their love deepened not in grand gestures but in the details, shared cups of coffee, long conversations under the stars, and moments of silence where no words were needed. One night, as they lay on the balcony wrapped in blankets, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky, Adrian spoke softly. I never thought I'd feel this kind of peace, he admitted. Leah turned to him, her eyes reflecting the glow of street lamps below. It's because we earned it, she said. We survived the heat, the chaos, and the fear. Now we can simply be together. Adrian nodded, absorbing her words, understanding that the life they had fought for was not fragile, it was forged in fire and tempered by trust. The seasons continued to change, and with each passing day, their bond grew stronger. They traveled to new cities, explored foreign landscapes, and returned home each time to the comfort of their apartment, their routines, and each other. Adrian no longer felt the need to constantly check the streets, and Leah no longer feared the shadow of his past looming over them. On a warm spring morning, Adrian proposed an idea that had been forming in his mind for months. Leah, he said, his hand finding hers, what if we took the next step? Not just together, but building a home, a life completely our own. Leah's eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and joy. I thought you'd never ask, she whispered. I want that, Adrian continued, his voice steady, a future where we make the rules, where nothing from the past can touch us. I want us to be free, fully and completely. She smiled, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. Then let's do it, she said, squeezing his hand. Let's build that life. That evening, as the sun set over the skyline they had once feared and desired in equal measure, Adrian and Leah stood together on their balcony. The city stretched endlessly before them, alive and indifferent, yet their world had changed. It was no longer defined by shadows or fear. It was defined by choice, by love, by a shared commitment to a life forged from chaos but now thriving in calm. Adrian wrapped an arm around Leah, holding her close. Whatever comes next, he said softly, we face it together. Nothing can touch us, not now, not ever. Leah rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Together, she echoed. And in that single word, the story that had begun in the heat of a night filled with fear, uncertainty, and danger found its peace. They had survived the impossible, chosen love over fear, and discovered that even in a world built on shadows, light could exist. The night was theirs, the city below unaware, and for the first time, Adrian Russo and Leah Carter could simply be free, together, and unafraid. The life they had chosen was not one of grandeur or power, but of authenticity and connection. And as the stars twinkled above, reflecting in the river like tiny promises, they knew that whatever storms the future might bring, they had already endured the greatest one, and they had endured it together.